It's not really a question of whether we're living in an age of delusions. The real question is, which delusion breaks first? Right? Think about that. If you're someone who's informed and you listen to the Health Ranger Report, or you read Natural News, or you're into being informed and aware, you know that so much of society around us today is running on fumes or living delusions. The tricky part is that delusions can continue on for quite some time. For example, we have this financial delusion that people are going to collect their pension payouts, right? We have this delusion that all these entitlements that people are owed, maybe you, probably including you, including Social Security entitlements and perhaps Medicare when you're old enough, and so on, maybe a pension fund. We're all living under the delusion that these are all fully funded and they're all going to be paid out because we're owed that money. And that's, for most people, they believe that, so they believe a delusion. Individuals like you and I know that most of those payouts can't be made. And, there will be a day of reckoning on pensions. But that's just one example, right? We've got delusions about even fossil fuels. How long can we run on fossil fuels given that it's a limited resource or a finite resource? Eventually the fossil fuels run out. What then? Or eventually we kill off the ocean ecosystems, and we're not that far away from doing that. The ocean fisheries collapse, the aquatic ecosystems collapse, and we have a collapse of a food web. And what are the repercussions when that happens? Because I assure you they are enormous. Pick your topic, whether it's economic collapse or cultural collapse, or even an issue like cryptocurrency. You got people believing that if they just buy this virtual asset that's not real, and they just hold on to it long enough, it's going to be worth a lot more in the future, and somehow they're making money by buying something that doesn't generate wealth or income in any real sense. That's a delusion too. Even investing in, like the Tesla company, that's a delusion in different ways. So there are many delusions. Obviously, we could both think of lots of examples of delusions. The question is, which delusion breaks first? Or how about the delusion that we're living in a free society that has a fair justice system? Or the delusion that we're living in a society of law? Because when you have the FBI conducting criminal operations, I didn't say investigating criminal operations, but the FBI running criminal operations, then you have to step back and ask, well, wait a second. You mean the top law investigations organization of our federal government is itself run by a bunch of criminals, or was when James Comey led it? And the answer is clearly yes. And so that's a delusion, this idea that we have a just society. Or how about the idea that your bank account is insured by the FDIC? You've probably been told that you're insured by the FDIC. I think they insure, $250,000 per account, roughly, unless you have multiple accounts of different types in the same bank, in which case it caps out at $250,000. I think that's how the rules work. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of banks, so I don't memorize all their rules, but that's a delusion, because in any systemic crash or collapse, the FDIC goes broke very quickly. And then what do you have? Oh, it turns out your bank account is insured by an insurance organization that has collapsed. Oh, what? Well, who insures the FDIC? Nobody? You mean other than just another government bailout that just takes more taxpayer dollars or creates more fiat currency money out of thin air? In essence, too, belief in the dollar is a delusion. If you think about it, the dollar is a faith-based currency. There's nothing real in that piece of green paper. It's significantly less than real. The value that it has today will be less tomorrow because the government's printing money. The dollar has lost, I think, 98% of its value since 1913 when the Federal Reserve was created. So the dollar is based on delusion. The healthcare system is delusional, right? Most pharmaceuticals don't really help anybody. They mask symptoms and they make people worse. And the pharmaceutical cartels are bribing the doctors and paying the doctors, in essence, to prescribe drugs that don't work on most people most of the time. That's why people keep getting sicker and cancer rates are rising. Healthcare costs are skyrocketing. So to even call it a healthcare system is itself a kind of delusion. So we can talk about a lot more examples if we want to, but which one collapses first? Now, I asked myself this question, and the honest answer is we don't know, because there could be a trigger point in any one of these areas. And some of these trigger points could be caused by, believe it or not, space weather. You say, what is space weather? Well, space weather is stuff that happens in outer space, like solar flares or rogue asteroids, comets, meteors striking the planet, for example. Or maybe we just get blasted by by a direct pulsar beam or neutron star exploding in our direction or something. I mean, there's all kinds, the Earth could be wiped out in an actual instant, by the way, from things that happen in outer space. The risk of that is very, very small, but the risk of a solar flare is large. It's, according to NASA, I believe they estimated that risk at about 12% every decade. We could call that 1% a year, roughly. So you might say in every century, you're going to have one giant solar flare, roughly, that takes down the power grid every 100 years, kind of rebooting society back into the Stone Age, or at least you might say the pre-industrial age, or early industrial age, let's say. Yeah, steam engines, that kind of stuff. That'll still work, but not electronics. So those risks are real, and those are things that we can't control. Has nothing to do with the academics from Harvard who believe they've figured out the economy, but they're still subjected to space weather, by the way. Solar flare, cause and effect. Or other things, cycles of weather, natural disasters, volcanoes, right? We've got Hawaii, which of course was created by volcanoes and is essentially a giant active volcano that's shifting its tectonic plate across the surface of the Earth while the volcano keeps spewing lava and mass underneath it. That's why the island chain is a chain. That's why it's kind of like a connect the dots exercise. And so there's more coming out of the southeastern portion of the Big Island, right? And there will be much more, and some of those could blow, and some of those could collapse into the ocean, causing massive tidal waves. Or heck, we could just have another Fukushima, another meltdown, another radioactive, catastrophe caused by humankind. The point is, we don't know what's going to break first, but we know that the interconnectedness of society means that all it takes is one major failure to cascade through the system. For example, if you lose global debt, then the banks go down and the money supply goes down, then how do you, let's say, deliver food? How do you run business transactions for grocery stores or transportation companies, for that matter? Or if there's a solar flare that takes down the power grid, how do you deliver fuel to the backup generators that run the coolant pumps on the nuclear power plants? The answer is you don't. And when those coolant pumps stop working, do you know what happens? It's called a meltdown. And there are over 200 nuclear power plants running right now in the United States, any of which could go into a nuclear meltdown, a criticality incident that could release large amounts of highly toxic radioisotopes, including cesium-137, that persists in the environment for a little under 300 years. That's about 10 half-lives of the radioisotope cesium-137. So, 3 centuries where you can't plant food downwind from 200 nuclear power plants. You see what I'm saying? All it takes is one thing. One thing can bring down the system by collapsing a chain of interdependencies without which modern human society cannot function. At least not in the way that you're used to, nor I. Because I don't know how many Americans are used to raising cattle and gardening and chopping wood to heat their homes and having no electricity and no convenience of a grocery store food. I don't know how many Americans can still live like the pioneers, canning food for the winter, salting their meat because there are no refrigerators. You see what I mean? Collapse of the conveniences of modern society would actually put most people back into a non-sustainable living situation, which is why the EMP Commission recently predicted that About 90% of Americans would die off if there were a solar flare or an EMP weapon attack over North America. 90% die-off rate. That's their prediction. I believe that's right, if I'm remembering it correctly. So why am I saying all this? Because I want you to observe. We all need to observe and consider what's happening, and consider that when we start to see one crack in the dam in any one sector of society, that can have a cascade of failures just flooding through the system. And we need to, in essence, react very aggressively in terms of our own preparedness. Maybe aggressively is not the right word. We need to react rapidly and with great purpose in order to save ourselves from systemic collapse. And most importantly, this is the big takeaway from all this, really. Maybe I should have started with this point, but when others notice that there's one failure in one sector, they might think, oh, that's just one failure. They can fix the, fuel refineries, or they can fix the nuclear power plants, or they can fix the power grid, or they can fix the money system. But what you will know is that a sufficiently large failure in one sector will have a cascading effect that bleeds into other sectors and brings down other sectors quite rapidly because of the interdependence of these various sectors of society. Healthcare depends on technology, for example. Technology depends on the power grid. The power grid depends on nuclear power plants. The nuclear power plants depend on fossil fuels as backup generators, for example, and also on electronic, circuitry to keep them running, and so on and so forth. The food production depends on farm automation, and food delivery depends on logistics of transportation. Transportation industry depends on the supply of rubber, without which you can't make truck parts and truck tires, right? And the logistics of rubber depends on international transportation and shipping. And international transportation and shipping depends on, GPS systems. You can draw thousands of interconnections. And that is our society. It is a massively interconnected, highly complex society that is extremely vulnerable to systemic failures that ripple through the system, because we have a lack of redundancy. We have a lack of isolation of these sectors. Instead, we have strong interdependence. And interdependence leads to vulnerabilities and weakness. And that is the structure of our society. And that's why the failures that happen in the future will be very large and amplified failures, rather than small localized failures that are limited in their scope. Hope that makes sense. You can read more about all this on my website, collapse.news. And check out my main website, naturalnews.com. This is Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. I'm also the creator of real.video, which is launching shortly. And you can sign up to have an account there, and you can post your own videos, have free speech, unlike YouTube, which has become a censorship platform and an echo chamber for stupidity. So check out real.video. Thanks for listening.
Learn more at healthrangerreport.com.
Thank you for watching. If you want to support our mission, visit us at healthrangerstore.com for the world's largest selection of lab-verified superfood and nutritional products for healthy living. It's at healthrangerstore.com.